I am in Springfield, Illinois, outside of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. This is one of my favorite museums in the entire country that I've been to. It is a fantastic display, much of it done by the Disney Imagineers. Now the world has changed since the last time I was here, because I'm wearing a mask. I also have a beard, but that's besides the point. So they are open now for visitors despite the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. So I got a time ticket, and we're gonna head inside. This is a very modern, high-tech museum that relies heavily on immersion and sensory overload like a Disney attraction. And that does make for a very unique museum experience. They also, of course, have some amazing artifacts here. There is an unusually giant statue of Abraham Lincoln and 1900s singer Perry Como. And I've seen this statue travel around, but it's been here for a while, so it might be here permanently now. I booked my online reservation earlier today. You used to be able to walk in and purchase admission, so I understand why they're doing this, but it's a bit annoying. After a temperature screening, I am heading into the museum. Here is the grand vestibule of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum, complete with a mock White House facade. In front of the Executive Mansion, there are wax likenesses of the Lincoln family. These are usually good for photo ops, but there's a red line now so you don't get too close or touch them. There's Abraham and Mary, along with their sons Robert, Willie, and Tad. It is noticeable that there's a lot less people here than usual, not complaining though. To start off, we're gonna head into the simulated southern Indiana forest and log cabin where Abraham Lincoln grew up. With the meticulous attention to detail in the tableaus and the audio, you can really start to sense the magnificent work of Imagineering. There's a young Abraham Lincoln staring out at the White House. Throughout the museum there are signs reminding about physical distancing, no touching, masks, and hand sanitizing. Entering the log cabin, similar to the one Lincoln was born in Kentucky, and those where he grew up among pure wilderness in Indiana. While the Lincolns were largely self-sufficient settler farmers, Abraham did very much enjoy reading. He would seize every infrequent opportunity he got at reading a book, despite the minimal formal education that was afforded to him. Eventually, Lincoln began working on flatboats starting at the age of 19 in 1828. With these trips, he first explored the Mississippi River and got his first taste of slavery. This is a powerful and horrifying tableau of a slave auction like the ones he reportedly witnessed in New Orleans. The auctioneer is cast in a devilish red, and the scene really is tragic. On his flatboat journeys, Lincoln first came across the tiny village of New Salem, Illinois, where he would eventually settle down in 1831. He got his first experiences with law and politics while there. He also worked a variety of jobs, including being a store clerk. During his 7 years in New Salem, he also fell deeply in love with Anne Rutledge. Here they are depicted in wax form at the Lincolnberry store. Sadly, Anne Rutledge would contract typhoid and died in 1835. Sending Lincoln into the first of many severe depressions or melancholias he would face throughout his life. In 1837, Lincoln, with his new law license and position in the state legislature, arrived in the new capital city of Springfield, Illinois. That was where he met Mary Todd of Kentucky. Here they are at Ninian Edwards' house getting through a rough and complicated courtship, but they eventually married in 1842. Their second son Eddie died at just 3 years of age in 1850, and this was his original grave marker. This museum rotates almost every artifact in the cases annually, so most of these artifacts were not on show during my last visit and video. These are all new relics I haven't seen before, so this is really exciting. This first new artifact is awesome. It's the original nameplate from the front door of the Lincoln home. A souvenir hunter stole it while the Lincolns were away for the presidency, and the home does now have a replica nameplate where this used to be. This is a birthday invitation written by Mary Lincoln for a local boy named Isaac Diller to come to Willie Lincoln's 7th birthday party. This was a children's book Mary commissioned for Tad to support the Sanitary Commission during the Civil War. The First Lady did have to balance domestic life and political obligations, so she did both here. And those scribbles are believed to be Tad's practice writing his signature. This was Mary Todd Lincoln's personal seal that she used to seal envelopes. It's interesting to note that Mary was from a wealthy family and had a lot more access to education than Abraham did. So Mary was extremely well-read and intelligent. This letter was written by Abraham Lincoln when he was the postmaster of New Salem. That was the first elected office he ever held. This note informs 2 newspaper editors that one of their subscribers had passed away. Interestingly, one of the recipients was Francis P. Blair Sr., one of the most influential newspaper editors and figures in national politics during that time, and he would become a future Republican ally of Lincoln's. Also, his son, Montgomery Blair, would serve as Lincoln's Postmaster General. Lincoln's first law partner here in Springfield was John Todd Stewart, who served as a mentor to him. He was also coincidentally Mary Todd's cousin. By the time of the Civil War, Lincoln and Stewart were on opposite political sides. The green ticket on the right is where Stewart ran on the local 1862 Democratic ticket. This sketch shows how Lincoln's last law office in Springfield appeared. He was in the still existing but no longer open to tours Lincoln Herndon Law Office building by the old state capitol for a long time, but from there they did move to the new office depicted here on the south side of the Capitol Square in 1852. This book is from the law office of Lincoln and his law partner William Herndon. They did have a full volume library of law books to stay up to date on the laws. Lincoln was always on top of that. This specific book, labeled with William Herndon's name, includes all laws passed by the Illinois General Assembly in 1846. This scene shows Lincoln's sons playing around and making a mess in his law office. Abraham was a pretty relaxed and fun father, so this might have been an actual scene visitors to his law office walked into. The children have splattered ink on the wall, and Abe just doesn't care. He's stretched out reading a newspaper on the sofa as he would usually do. Lincoln was the Republican candidate for the contentious Illinois Senate seat up for grabs, and he participated in a series of 7 highly publicized debates against his opponent Stephen Douglas. This wax scene depicts the 5th debate at the Old Main in Galesburg, Illinois. That is the only debate site preserved today as it was, and I have been there. It's really amazing. Lincoln did lose the Senate election after the debates, but he was now a national figure as the country was deteriorating. Also, notice how the debate scene shares a wall with the slave auction scene. Really great exhibit design work here. When the 1860 presidential election was upon the nation, Abraham Lincoln managed to secure the Republican nomination against all odds and very powerful figures. Here are some artifacts from the divisive 1860 campaign. His rival here in Illinois, Stephen Douglas, was the Northern Democratic nominee, but there was also John C. Breckinridge running as a Southern Democrat, which totally split their vote and allowed Lincoln to win. Here are the side-by-side life masks of Lincoln and Douglas. And this is a letter handwritten by Abraham Lincoln in March of 1858 regarding the Senate race between the 2 Illinoisans. This is a clever mock broadcast of the 1860 campaign.
This popular sovereignty catchphrase is just a clever way to encourage the spread of slavery. But Douglas says his goal is to let people vote their conscience.
Washington politicians want to tell you how to live your life. They think Washington knows what's best. But there's one candidate who believes in you, Stephen A. Douglas. He believes in popular sovereignty. That means that wherever you live, you get to choose what's best for you. Stephen A. Douglas, for you.
Paid for by Little Giants for Douglas.
Douglas seemed like an easy winner.
Your grandfather started with a bare patch of earth. You've built a way of life that will last for centuries. Only now, some men you don't even know want to come in and steal your property, destroy your home, and put you in jail. To these men, our state constitutions are so much kindred. John C. Breckinridge, revenge. He'll fight for your rights, your property, your home.
Paid for by Patriots for Breckenridge.
Where Bell is quite popular and just might win.
Slavery must be abolished. Slavery is our right.
It's time for the shouting to stop. John Bell, the country needs a calm voice right now. His voice.
Paid for by Citizens for Bell.
A vague promise of harmony from constitutional unionists, in the belief that if Lincoln carries enough northern states, he can win in the Electoral College and take the White House without a single Southern vote. Ironically, union is the theme of the latest message from Illinois Republican Abraham Lincoln.
Union. The founding fathers created it. Our forefathers shed their blood to defend it. And now one and only one man can preserve it. Abraham Lincoln. 2 years ago, he said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Isn't it time we got that house in order? Lincoln Hamlin, one nation, indivisible forever.
Paid for by Wide Awake Clubs for Abe Lincoln.
A reassuring promise of national unity from a candidate campaigning only in the North.
Sure enough, Abraham Lincoln was elected as the 16th President of the United States. As the southern states began seceding, Lincoln departed his hometown to take up the great tasks, and he knew when leaving on that train that he may never return home alive. Now we'll continue the exhibition and head into the Executive Mansion. Underneath the portico, there are wax figures of Generals McClellan and Grant. Lincoln had a lot of problems with McClellan, but Grant turned out to be the right man in the end. And these wax figures really reflect their personalities. There are also wax figures of Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass, who would end up being very influential on Lincoln's decisions about allowing for black troops and emancipation. Upon entering the Blue Room, Mary Todd Lincoln is getting dressed up for a ball, and behind her are replica dresses of her socialite rivals she had to deal with in Washington high society. They also have a figure of Elizabeth Keckley, Mary's personal seamstress and very close confidant. On April 12, 1861, the first shots were fired on Fort Sumter, and the Civil War had been fully initiated. Abraham Lincoln, as Commander-in-Chief, would have to lead the Union in a war against itself. This peculiar hallway is filled with anti-Lincoln cartoons and newspapers, and is shrouded with doubtful and antagonistic voices criticizing him from all angles. It's like walking through Lincoln's mind at the time. And man, this section really is a masterpiece.
Thousands of people of the United States. This Abraham Lincoln. The man is the original John Stamp. Lincoln has called for 500,000 more victims. The women had better buy their morning goods now. Secretary blistered with Lincoln. Did you hear his inaugural address? What in great stupidity? What insolent? President reaches nothing but condensed months of insolent salary. Last vestige of American liberty. Gone. Mrs. Lincoln. All the powers of government to crush out the spirit of American liberty. His astonishing incompetence has no equal in Washington. Is so oddly thin, his arms, long, scraggling neck. Covered with rough office in America. Mr. Lincoln is indecent, insensitive, and blasphemous.
One of her servants called Mrs. Lincoln downright cranky, bordering on ornery.
I hear Mr. Lincoln's own staff refer to Mrs. Lincoln as her satanic magic.
Who failed without excuse, and who fell without a friend. You pity Lincoln till he opens his mouth. Then hate becomes
To teach me the time, I spent thousands on war.
He took by mistake from a head twice the size. Lincoln's record is in every vintage file of revolting evil.
On the evening of February 5th, 1862, their son Willie had taken a turn for the worse after contracting typhoid fever. And here's the recreated scene of what is now the Lincoln bedroom. This tableau is magnificent. There is music coming from a huge party that was happening downstairs in the East Room. The Lincolns had paid over $1,000 for a big gathering of 500 esteemed guests that evening. But as seen here, the First Lady was attending to her dying son upstairs, and Abraham kept coming up to the deathbed from the party. The loud ticking clock with the disjointed, muffled music is haunting. I also noticed Lincoln is carrying Jack the Doll, a costume Zouave doll that was loved by his son. The downpour here shows how depressed Mary became after Willie's death. She couldn't stand to have the usual White House parties or gatherings for about a year.
Mr. Lincoln can't even find a general who knows how to fight.
It will be dead gone before little Mac gives him a victory.
That McClellan is all show and he'll fight.
And I hear that old Abe is getting set to issue a proclamation setting the slaves free. All 4 million of them.
Now, where did you ever hear?
Seems to me Mr. Lincoln needs black men in the Union Army to win this war.
You are as touched in the head as old Mary.
Oh, Mrs. Lincoln touched?
Well, ever since young Mr. Willie died, she's been acting strange. Crying all the time. Didn't you see the voodoo lady? What do you call it?
This is an incredible wax diorama of a cabinet meeting between Lincoln's team of rivals. Here they are engaged in deep deliberation about the Emancipation Proclamation. Also, I noticed Jack the doll Abraham was bringing to his dying son in the previous scene, is stashed in that desk. It's not the real thing, but there is a story that the doll obtained a presidential pardon from Lincoln, since in Willie's imagination, the Zouave doll was found guilty of falling asleep at his military post. There, Secretary of State William Seward and Secretary of the Treasury Salmon Chase are having a conversation. There's Postmaster General Montgomery Blair looking pretty adamant about something while pointing at the map, and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton is also there. That guy was efficient at his job. His work running the War Department during the war was remarkable. Attorney General Edward Bates, who is really old, is looking extremely overwhelmed. Secretary of the Interior Caleb Smith is next to him, and at the end, Secretary of the Navy Gideon Wells is also looking very stressed out. These cabinet meetings were intense. When Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a lot of people disagreed vehemently for a variety of reasons, and while some supported it, many more thought it didn't go far enough.
And my fellow senators are worried you'll take us all down with you. The people are wild for peace, and the other side wants to give it to them. The Union can be restored. That was always our goal, union. You, however, insist that peace can only come if the Confederates abandon slavery. Since I know you won't relent on this, I have no other choice but to insist you step aside for the party's sake, and the sooner the better.
The sooner you act on emancipation, the sooner the malignant Southern traitors who seek to divide and destroy this country can themselves be destroyed.
Our prophecy, and it will destroy the country. No less than the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has ruled that African slaves are chattel, but no more rights than a dog or a
hearts of liberty and equality are kosher. And your prayers and hymns are mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, hypocrisy. There is not a nation of this bloody than the people of the United States this very hour. And now, with this document, you can begin to put it right. Mr. President.
The costly Civil War was always going on in the background. They don't have too many artifacts related to the war on display, but there are some Union and Confederate uniforms along with a timeline map. There is also a collection of Civil War photography. Here is a replica of the 1861 Leonard Volk life cast of Lincoln's head and hands. Usually you can touch them, but best not to right now for obvious reasons. And here's Lincoln's 1865 life mask, cast shortly before his assassination. You can see how much the work and stress had aged him in just 4 years. During major battles, Lincoln would sit in the War Department's telegraph office for news and casualty numbers. It must have been unbearably stressful and difficult. There were occasions of deep disappointment and grief, but also great triumph. Here's a Gettysburg half cyclorama showing the battle and Lincoln delivering the Gettysburg Address at the dedication of the National Cemetery there. There's a campaign flag for the 1864 election. One Unionist Democrat turned Republican Andrew Johnson of Tennessee was placed on the ticket as vice president. Since Andrew Johnson was the only Southern senator to remain loyal to the Union, Lincoln had originally awarded Johnson by appointing him as the military governor of Tennessee. And in this letter written by Andrew Johnson, he is ordering General George Thomas to move against the Confederate forces that were operating in eastern Tennessee at the time. After Lincoln's assassination, Andrew Johnson became president, much to the chagrin of congressional Republicans. They became frustrated with his apparent favoritism to former Confederates and his lack of support for newly freed African Americans. In 1868, they had Johnson impeached, the first ever presidential impeachment. And that is what these spectator tickets are from. They were hot tickets to get during his 3-day trial. Johnson got off by just 1 vote. This is a German translation of the Emancipation Proclamation that was printed in Philadelphia. Germans had a long-standing opposition to slavery in the 19th century, and most German immigrants were Republicans and supported Lincoln. The comparatively late destruction of slavery in the United States was viewed as a big global step forward for freedom. The people of Rome, Italy congratulated Lincoln on his 1864 re-election by sending him an inscribed slab of the Servian Wall. And this is a piece of it. The ancient Romans built the Servian Wall as a fortification around the city in the 4th century BC, and it became a symbol of their independence and freedom. The full slab of the wall Lincoln received is embedded in his tomb now, just below his statue and where the name Lincoln is engraved. Since visitors are not allowed to climb the steps anymore, it is inaccessible and not visible to the public. I've been there several times and I never even knew it was there. But here at the Presidential Museum they have a small stone fragment from it. This Bible was gifted to President Lincoln by the ladies of the Citizens Volunteer Hospital of Philadelphia in the spring of either 1864 or 1865. There are some Confederate banknotes on the left, which depict John C. Calhoun and enslaved African Americans working plantation fields. By contrast, on the right, there is an image widely published at the time of President Lincoln's triumphant entry into the fallen Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. After 4 years of foiled attempts to take the city, Lincoln had to go visit for himself. He even went through the Confederate White House and sat at Jefferson Davis's desk. The famous song Dixie was actually written in the North in 1859 before the war began, and pieces of sheet music like this would have been a common sight in music stores across the North. Just about every Northerner knew the song, and Lincoln himself liked it very much, and he tried to make it a symbol of post-war reconciliation. The Southerners did take up the name Dixie, and next to the sheet music is a Confederate children's textbook called the Dixie Reader, which prioritizes religion, etiquette, and speech, alongside the supposed benefits of slavery. This letter was written by President Lincoln to General Henry Halleck, who was the commander of all Union forces at the time, and here Lincoln is insisting the Army of the Potomac, quote, make Lee's army, and not Richmond, its objective points. Halleck would soon be replaced by Grant, who was aggressive enough to accomplish this task. And here's a display on the famed actor John Wilkes Booth. This copy of David Garrett's Catherine and Petruchio is autographed by Booth. This was his stage copy while performing at Philadelphia's Arch Street Theater in the late 1850s. But Booth would become fixated on the Civil War despite his growing popularity, and would end up committing one of the most heinous acts imaginable. That is why this image of John Wilkes Booth with the devil was widely circulated after the assassination. Lincoln did it. He successfully led and navigated the country through its most tumultuous phase and could finally begin working to reunite the country. But on the evening of April 14, 1865, he went to see a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. Here is the scene of the presidential booth. The Lincolns were joined by Sergeant Rathbone and his fiancée. John Wilkes Booth walked right in and put a bullet in the back of Abraham Lincoln's head. He passed away the next morning. This is a remarkable replication of the funeral catafalque as Lincoln's casket lay in state in the House of Representatives chamber of the old state capitol here in Springfield, Illinois, the night before temporary burial at Oak Ridge Cemetery. This recreation is absolutely amazing. It's almost like you're really there. There was a big Lincoln funeral train journey throughout several northern cities, from Washington, D.C. to Springfield. There are some timetables for potential onlookers to know when to expect the train to pass by them, as well as a program of procession which lays out how Lincoln's body made its way through Chicago. There's also a ticket to a house where the funeral escort stayed during the memorial service in Albany, New York. Lincoln's longtime political ally and close friend Judge David Davis wore this mourning sash to the final funeral ceremony at Oak Ridge Cemetery. I do have videos on Lincoln's tomb in Oak Ridge Cemetery if you're interested. This is an original copy of the New York Herald headlining Lincoln's assassination. They produced at least 4 editions in the 24 hours following the attack, as readers anxiously waited for details about the president's condition. This is the 3 a.m. edition, giving an update on his condition. He would not die for a few more hours. Queen Victoria of England sent this mourning feather in 1876 to the Lincoln Association of Springfield, which supervised the construction and maintenance of the Lincoln tomb. It was likely taken from a swan at St. James's Park near Buckingham Palace. That's pretty amazing. Now inside the Treasures Gallery, which has all different treasures on display from those that were here last year. And this first one is pretty awesome. That is one of Matthew Brady's photo boxes used to carry photo plates and other supplies. Matthew Brady was one of the nation's most famous photographers during the Civil War period, both for his portraiture of politicians like Lincoln and battlefield aftermath photography. These items are from Robert Lincoln's law desk in Chicago. He did become a prominent lawyer after the assassination of his father, but he was also Secretary of War, Minister to Great Britain, and became president of the Pullman Car Company. This is a bust of Robert Lincoln's son Abraham Lincoln II, also known as Jack Lincoln, and he was Abraham Lincoln's grandson that he never got to meet. He grew up in luxury and was often compared to his grandfather, but he contracted blood poisoning in France and died at the age of 16. This bust of Jack Lincoln was in Robert Lincoln's Hildene Mansion in Vermont, which I really need to get to. This is Dr. Mudd's pardon. Dr. Samuel Mudd was who John Wilkes Booth went to the evening he shot Lincoln, The doctor splinted Booth's broken leg from Ford's Theater. When he was caught, Mudd denied knowledge of the assassination conspiracy, but was found guilty and imprisoned at Fort Jefferson near Key West, which is now Dry Tortugas National Park. Mudd had avoided the death penalty the others faced by 1 vote, but President Andrew Johnson eventually issued him this pardon in 1869. And this was a piece of rope used to hang Lewis Powell, also known as Lewis Payne. I've discovered on the internet that he's often considered the hottest Lincoln conspirator, but he was hanged with Mary Surratt and 2 others on July 7, 1865. Powell nearly killed Secretary of State William Seward. He broke into his house and stabbed the sick, bedridden secretary several times. His medical braces might have actually saved his life. This is a fire bucket from the USS Hartford, Admiral David Farragut's flagship. That is epic. Farragut commanded the Hartford through the war's biggest naval actions, including New Orleans and Vicksburg. Admiral Farragut wrote this letter to General Nathaniel Banks about his long-term plans of operation on the southern coast of the Confederacy, with Mobile, Alabama being his prime target. His plans would culminate in the Battle of Mobile Bay, where he famously declared, "Damn the torpedoes." This is Corporal Andrew Jackson Smith's posthumous Congressional Medal of Honor. It was given to his family by President Bill Clinton in 2001. Smith was born into slavery. He escaped, and when the war broke out, he became a camp servant to Major John Warner of the 41st Illinois. He earned a reputation for bravery, especially when he retrieved new mounts for Warner under fire at Shiloh, where he was also shot in the forehead. He did survive and recover from that, and after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, he immediately joined the 55th Massachusetts Regiment. He took up the regimental colors at the Battle of Honey Hill after the flag bearer fell, and that is why he finally got this well-deserved medal. This is an original chair from Ford's Theater, and this chair reportedly sat in the orchestra level. This was a Union prisoner of war's Confederate coat. It was worn by Thomas D. Vredenburg, who was 19 when he enlisted in the 10th Illinois Cavalry. He was captured by the Confederates in Louisiana and was originally held in the Shreveport County Jail. While there, a Southern woman reportedly gave him this jacket, a Confederate Army coat, and he kept this coat with him during his time as a prisoner of war until he was exchanged in 1864. Abraham Lincoln became a surveyor during his time at New Salem, and he made this really nice map of the town of Huron, Illinois. Since Illinois was still frontier, Huron was a speculated town intended to be the main Sangamon River crossing between Springfield and Havana, Illinois, as well as the terminal point of a proposed canal. Obviously, Lincoln was helping to conceive of the town, but the town and canal never came to be, even though Lincoln did own 2 lots in Huron, which didn't do too much for him. Still, this is a map sketched in Abraham Lincoln's hand. That's pretty cool. As I mentioned, President Lincoln and General George McClellan did not tend to get along, especially after the Peninsula Campaign, which basically wasted a year and accomplished nothing. This letter from October 1862 finds Lincoln approaching his last straw with the general. Once the Battle of Antietam concluded, McClellan refused to pursue the Confederates, and he was still there after a whole month. McClellan still refused to do anything, citing that the army couldn't move due to exhausted horses. Lincoln's response in this letter reveals his frustration, as he is uncharacteristically confrontational and dismissive. He would permanently remove McClellan from command 2 weeks later. And finally, this is a piece of Laura Keene's dress, stained with Abraham Lincoln's blood. Laura Keene was perhaps the most famous actress in America in 1865, and she was starring in the April 14th showing of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. Once a gunshot rang, Booth jumped onto the stage and chaos broke out in the theater. The actress rushed up to Lincoln's box and cradled his head in her lap before helping to move him to the Peterson house across the street. This is a piece of the dress she was wearing. After that traumatic event, Laura Keene did continue to tour with the production, and in November of 1866 she was starring here in Springfield, where she visited the temporary tomb of Lincoln and decided to donate this blood-stained piece of her dress. That is an incredible relic. This plaster cast Lincoln bust was made by Gutzon Borglum, who was later the sculptor of Mount Rushmore, and this was the prototype for his famous Lincoln bust that's now in the US Capitol, and another version that's outside his tomb. One of the best parts of this museum is the Ghosts of the Library show. It is an indescribably awesome show using lots of Imagineering techniques and effects. It is extremely well done and exciting, and it's something you really have to see for yourself, but here it is.
Oh, hi. You're already here. I guess I didn't see you come in. Is this on? Can everybody hear me? Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. I'm glad you could visit us today. My name is Thomas, and I am here to tell you a little bit about what we do here and why this is such a special place to visit. A presidential library isn't like an ordinary library where you check out a book to read. It's a place where we historians do our most important research work. This is an archive where we preserve and study a collection of original letters, personal objects, photos, and papers about a president and his times. These things help us understand how people thought back then. Like this. This is Mary Lincoln's music box. Some of the actual music the Lincolns heard, played the same way as they heard it. But so what? Why study all this old stuff? Who cares? Some people wonder if history isn't just a lot of dull, useless stuff you have to memorize for school. It might be different if these objects and papers could speak. What secrets would they reveal? But then sometimes they do speak. Sometimes late at night, when the library gets dark and quiet and you're alone. Sometimes, if you listen deeply, the history comes to life. One of our jobs is to collect rare manuscripts. Ever wonder what a Civil War battle was really like? Here's a journal of a young soldier who was there. I heard the screaming and bursting of shells, canister, and shrapnel. The death screams of wounded animals. The groans of their human companions, wounded and dying. A perfect hell on earth. By studying these memories, we create our own experience of those times, as if we had been there with them long ago. Sometimes, in our imaginations, these people seem so real. If only we could meet them for a moment, ask them a question. But we can't. They're gone. And everyone knows there's no such thing as a ghost. But here is something that is real. The people may be gone, but they have left their words and their possessions. In a mysterious way, these original objects connect us to the people and events of history and make them real. The Gettysburg Address, in Lincoln's own hand. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom,
and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
The power of those words almost makes you feel like he's right here with us. This might surprise you, but this collection is still growing. We get new items all the time. These came in today. I often dream of discovering in a farmhouse attic, in a garage sale, or perhaps right here in the collection, a long-lost box that has not been opened in 100 years. Imagine what could be inside it. A secret diary? Clues that unlock a mystery, perhaps a letter. A long lost letter that no one has read in over 100 years. What could it say? Perhaps it would be one of the missing Mary letters. You see, after Lincoln's death, their oldest son Robert had his mother declared insane. Then he tried to collect all the letters she wrote and suppress them. Why? What was in them? But Robert burned all those letters, or as many as he could find. So perhaps we'll never know. Or perhaps we'll find the answer in the next box or envelope we open. This library is filled with items that, well, they're almost like buried treasure. Take this deed, for example. It's just a deed for a very small plot of land, no big deal, until you read the fine print and see that it's a burial plot for the Lincoln's second child, Eddie, who died in the Lincoln's home just a few blocks from where you were sitting right now. This deed helps us picture two broken-hearted parents who were saying goodbye to their beloved little boy. To lose a child is an almost unbearable burden for even the strongest parents. Mary lost 3 of her 4 children: Eddie, Willie, Tad. And of course, Mary saw her husband die too. Grief. Yes, that's here. So are joy, anger, heartbreak, love, sacrifice, and triumph. Let me show you what I mean. You see that flag? It's my favorite item from this collection. The flag from the 33rd Illinois. That flag was with us on June 22nd, 1863, when we were down in Mississippi at a town called Vicksburg. General Grant ordered an assault that morning. I was a proud member of the 33rd, and I carried that flag into battle. I didn't come back, but we still have the flag. So, why save all this stuff? Because our past illuminates our future. It tells us we are a people who despise oppression and embrace freedom, and that we are willing to fight and, if need be, die for those ideals. I know. I died for those ideals that day in Vicksburg. That was my flag. Now, it's yours. As long as our story is told, our experience becomes your experience. Our courage becomes your courage. And the best part of us lives on in you.
Alright, that was my 2020 pandemic visit to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. It's always an amazing and inspiring place to visit, and I do intend to come here more frequently for the artifact changeouts. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it, and also subscribe to my channel to help it grow. I have many more videos on Lincoln and presidential history, along with much more, and thanks for watching.